everyone. My name is Rebecca Ustrell. I'm with Curious Publishing. Our company is a small press located in Southern California, and we work with artists that have not had the resources to amplify their stories or practices because of barriers that have kept them marginalized over time. Our mission is to support marginalized artists first, especially BIPOC, queer, and women artists. And we're here with my business partner and life partner, Samuel Siner, who has been here since we started just late 2017 into 2018 is when Curious Publishing began. So, Sam, let's hear a little about your story and how you got connected.
Absolutely. So I'm Sam or Samuel. I'm the production assistant for Curious Publishing. A lot of people, the easiest way to explain it is I've been helping since day zero. As far as what I do for production assistant, it could be anything. In the early days, I drove the car, loaded for the events, bartended at the at the bars at the events that we would have. Um, and then it eventually transitioned to being more involved with the production of Curious Magazine. So now I help as a liaison in communications between artists and coordinating submissions and vetting them with Rebecca. And on top of that, also just running the shipping and taking stuff to the post office and also managing our brick and mortar store in Claremont Art and Bodega. So pretty much if there's anything that Rebecca doesn't do, I probably do it.
Yeah, you've been a super tremendous help. Um, so we just a little background. So we ended up getting married, but we didn't meet through Curious Publishing. We used to both work in customer service jobs, and we both are artists. And we're just like, you know what, this is not doing it for us. What can we do to start talking more about our art practices, connecting with our friends, and
Yeah.
making something happen here in our corner of SoCal. So if you're not really familiar with the Inland Empire, which is where we're based out of, it's just about 35 to 40 miles in from Los Angeles, where all the Amazon warehouses are. San Bernardino County, the biggest county in the country, lots of blue collar workers, but also a ton,
Very suburban.
right? It's houses, it's families, people working in different trades. And there's also a huge young population, teen to ages like 45, that are active artists that have been reaching out to other big metropolitan areas to try to get their names out there. And from my personal experience, getting left out of the picture and the imprint of what's culturally happening in California. So naturally, it was this thing that I saw needed to happen. You know, how do we get these artist practices stories out there? And I took it upon myself to create a small press to do that. But I mean, it didn't just kind of happen overnight, of course. I was an illustrator whenever I started Curious Publishing, and had this idea that, okay, if I can't get my artwork into traditional gallery settings, what's the next way where I can get this to be accessible in everyone's hands? And being a fan of the zine community, a new fan of the zine community, I'd gone to some zine fest that colleges put on down here in the Claremont colleges. I was a zine collector and a printed ephemera collector. I thought that it would be cool to make some flyers with my artwork on it, maybe some small volume zines. And I created Curious Publishing as a press to kind of elevate and legitimize my practice and get things to people at a cheaper rate. So it really started as accessibility. Sam was also on a similar path. He was writing music at the time on piano, and I had this thought that maybe I can marry my illustrations with other people in my life's artworks. So
Yeah.
Sam actually ended up writing some music. I don't know if you want to talk more about that, Sam, for our first volume of
Yeah,
Curious.
no, absolutely. Kind of my way of seeing how Curious Publishing came into fruition was also how you used to organize the art walks in Claremont for pretty much all 2016 and 17. And I always remember it's like, oh yeah, this was pretty cool. But honestly, I mean, I knew like you showed me some of the work that obviously that you had or that your friends had, and it was definitely something that was just a little bit too radical and just a little bit too raw just for a public art walk. So I even knew before when there was concrete plans for a magazine that like what we wanted to cover, what we wanted to highlight, show was just the actual like fruits of like living artists, and for all the warts and all, as far as just what it means to be an artist here in the Inland Empire. So circling back to the first issue of Curious Publishing and the music that I was making, yeah, the first issue of Curious Magazine was Millennial Pink, and I decided that, you know what, at the time I was really into avant-garde piano music and it's a lot of like modernist stuff, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna make a piece that's inspired by the color, literally millennial pink, and yeah, it's in there. A lot's changed since then as far as what I do musically, but that's like the first time I ever performed an original piece at that release party. It was awesome. It was incredibly validating, and just to see other people's interpretations of the theme and just everything just kind of going together was truly creating a moment. Because obviously, yes, we were creating a magazine which compiled artwork on this specific topic, but when we actually had the release party, everyone got to actually meet each other. It was, I think someone said like it's as if Instagram like came to life and you can actually see all these different artists, and then people are connecting. People are just honestly just gassing each other up and learning about each other's practices and just being, wow, there's all this talent here. It's like, why doesn't this talent gather more often? And soon enough, I think by the night of that first event, people were saying, wow, that was great. When's the next one? So yeah, people were into it from the get go.
Yeah. So kind of to backtrack a little, I created the name Curious Publishing to self-publish my own zines, which were illustrative works. Um, I had like a zine on unemployment because I wasn't working at the time, a zine called Etowanda because we have the Etowanda Preserve here, and my art practice is just connecting with my environment and then writing about it, and kind of a like indie kind of way, like observations of life. And I didn't want what I was doing to become an echo chamber because I had a lot of art friends and creatives in my network that were also writers, filmographers, musicians. I wanted to see their perspective. I thought of how I wanted to do a zine on unemployment, and then I was like, what if I took something that could be more universally relatable? And at the time in 2018, I think it was the color of year that year or the year before that, they coined it millennial pink, but really it was this shade of pink that was occurring in art, fashion, design at the time. And it turns out it has a kind of rich history, called Baker Miller pink, which was this color that was psychologically studied in prisons to actually calm prisoners and make a more serene environment. So if you're really nerding out on that, you can Google Baker Miller Pink to learn more about it. But we put out the prompt Millennial Pink and got in all of these submissions on people's interpretations of what that meant to them. And it was, as you might think, a millennial audience. I'm a millennial, Samuel's a millennial, and it was the most natural place to start connecting with artists around here. That was before we created our mission statement for marginalized voices, but the audience that I was reaching organically was marginalized voices because being a Latina, Jewish, low income artist that's in the service industry, wanting to share my art practice with others, I became that advocate for my friends that were in that same kind of community as I was. And Samuel was one of the first collaborators that I had. That's how Curious Magazine was first launched. But we've actually since then created a quarterly issue of Curious Magazine that is our magazine that we put out, calls for art on different topics. And this year we are in the last issue of our empathy themed issues of magazine. Our year of empathy started with empathy and resilience. And it's kind of been this thing where every year we put out this call for art, people submit their work, and we publish the work by crowdfunding the printing cost and paying different feature artists to be featured in the magazine. I kind of want to talk a little bit about the other things that we do and why Curious Magazine has laid that foundation for us to actually go above and beyond just sharing our work with each other and really into providing paid opportunities and a bigger platform for marginalized artists. So let's talk about when we got the project from Aaron Longsleeves, a collaborator out of
Oh, yeah.
LA. now in the Inland Empire, called Calamity Magazine. So we met Aaron Longsleeves through an open call initially. One of our collaborators, who is named Sherry, put us onto Aaron's work, and he had a similar idea to Curious Magazine. He had a group of his own community of artists that he thought could use a little bit of a boost and community to amplify their stories, and said, I have this idea. I think I want to call it Calamity Magazine, and this is going to highlight Black artists and recording musicians and street artists out of Southern California, LA area, all the way up to the Bay Area. And this is his own personal network. So by this time, it was 2020, it was middle of the pandemic, and there was nothing but time for artists to kind of do their big collaborative dreams, even though we couldn't all see each other in person, and the access that way was
Yeah.
bad. You know, artists were kind of desperate to connect beyond Instagram and through projects that would leave a bigger imprint and a bigger impact on their communities. So through Aaron's project, it was a similar prompt to Curious Magazine. Uh, but even though the prompt was so similar to Curious, the outcome was totally different.
Yeah, no, and the coolest thing about Calamity was kind of it kind of recreated the initial experience for a lot of artists that they had with our first or second issues of the magazine, where it was like a here's the interesting thing. I feel like I need a little bit of let me give a little bit of backstory to it. This is the sense that starting in pandemic, as we mentioned, when Curious Publishing and Curious Magazine first started with Millennial Pink, the audience was pretty much just millennials, right? But literally just 2.5, 2 years later, starting in 2020, leading into 2021, we noticed that there was not just a demographic shift, but just a growth too. We had suddenly Gen Z artists coming of age. So I feel like with Calamity Magazine, when it debuted in its larger format and kind of expanded the horizon of like the kind of art that we covered, this is around the time that we even released a couple of cassettes as well too through Curious. It kind of gave people like who are just tuning in for the first time, like that really huge moment of like, wow, this is the possibility, not just with print, but just what an art publishing company can do just to connect a whole scene or just to inspire all sorts of new work and new creativity. And Aaron's just has brought a lot of cool people and cool energy ever since then too. He even, I think, a couple months after Calamity, ended up creating a musical project with one of our other friends, and to me, that's just yet another example of just how the community connecting with each other and just finding different styles of artists, just finding ways that how it all fits together, and just how powerful of a momentum that forms. So, yeah, Calamity brought a lot of awesome energy and just brought a lot of new blood into the Curious pipeline.
Totally. And it brings up a good point of, why we thought it was important to talk about this at Seattle Design Fest, and why we decided to go with the active printed ephemera over just digital communications. I mean, we had Instagram, we
Yeah.
had a Stay Curious Sundays series where we interviewed artists and shared their work digitally, and we're really trying to create as many accessible ways to interact with the media that we produce and uplift artists. But the active printing these zines and artist prints and even cassettes, and creating kind of like a lo-fi throwback version of art is important to us, for a lot of reasons. One, it was the way that I connected with art when I was younger and had very little means. I'm also an older millennial, so I wasn't always with a computer. I learned a lot about art through encyclopedias, flyers from local art shows and concerts at church. They'd create pamphlets that had both picture, words, and a little bit about the community. And I kind of held on to that, as my way of accessing my community, regardless of the technology that I had. And even though I think that a lot of people don't get that at first of why we decided to go with printed matter, that's really where it comes from, the heart. It's kind of like, this is a responsibility we're taking upon ourselves to use resources responsibly and sustainably sourced when at all possible, to put out these volumes that will leave a permanent mark wherever they end up, whether it's exchanging zines with each other, of
Yeah.
donating them to like college libraries. Um, yeah, I think that Sam has a similar feeling, and it's why,
Yeah.
beyond meeting each other and talking about collaborating as artists, why print also matters to Sam. Um, I want you to talk a little bit about why you think it's important that we do
Absolutely.
printed matter over digital media.
Kind of even touching on the history of zines in the sense that it was a way for marginalized, underrepresented, or just kind of outsider communities to just own their own narrative and present their experience and how they experience it. That's how it felt even from the get-go, just for producing art, mostly from artists from the Inland Empire, for Curious Publishing. Because one thing I noticed too is a lot of our artists that we have, and much like myself and Rebecca, are working artists. People will go through phases of just being active, and then sometimes we'll go through dormant phases too. So to us, having a quarterly publication, or just to have those capture those moments when people were having their own artistic moment, is really powerful because you know print's pretty darn permanent compared to maybe the digital attention span, or how things come and go a lot where it comes to social media or just digital media. But someone years from now can unearth one of these zines or one of the magazines or one of our art books in a thrift store someday, and that is something that you never know if even if something like Instagram goes under, or even all that data is lost, the fact that it's in print makes it as permanent as almost as possible as it can be. And it's about capturing those moments. I remember one time, Rebecca, you were describing it to me. It's like a zine, or like even publishing. You almost see it like an indie film, like broken down into different stills, in the sense that it's just documenting life. And that is super important because I feel a lot of the stuff here just goes unnoticed, or we try to sometimes censor ourselves or try to clean ourselves up a little bit, just to squeeze ourselves through those very narrow doors, just for that access. But for us, since we're able to, our whole mission statement is to keep that door open for people. People can just simply express what they want to and tell the story, their own story that they want to, and it empowers other people once they see that, oh, someone is just putting it out there, and that is huge. A little bit of an aside, but this is actually one of my favorite quirks about Curious that I noticed too, is that we'll have a lot of people's, and maybe I'm also talking about myself in this sense too, is that artists again grow. So it's pretty interesting that looking at some of our quarterly magazines or things like that, someone that maybe was a photographer or a visual artist at some point, couple magazine issues or a couple years down the line, they're still publishing us, but now they're dabbling with their poetry, which is, something new and exciting for them.
No, I think that you put it really well. Curious Publishing over time has become a networking opportunity, which I know, I mean, even I like cringe when people used to tell me like, "Oh, you want your art to go out there, like you got to network," and I'd just be like, "Oh, networking! Like I'm an introvert,
Yeah.
I'm an artist. Like, why are you doing this to me?" But when you refry it and you really own the way that you're sharing out all of your artwork, which in my case was zines and printmaking, it doesn't feel like this forced act anymore. You're really going out there and connecting with your tribe, and other tribe, they come in and learn about your practice as well. And let's not forget that for most people that are blue collar or low income like I was, and I'm skating that line still now as a working artist, is you're not, your priority isn't in making sure that you're being represented in the media or in the workforce. You're kind of consumed by hoping that you're going to get by, maybe sell some artwork soon, pay your bills, have a good time with your friends, thrive in your family. And really, your your hopes is that you end up in a community where you have advocates to make sure that whenever you are deciding to share your works, that you're being represented the way that you should. And accessibility hasn't always been easy, and still isn't easy for artists that are of color, indigenous artists, women artists, or even just artists with disabilities that can't access the same things that you and I can by just going on our computers and knowing how to apply for a grant, for instance. So that was one of the big reasons why we went beyond our quarterly publication that really started just for fun and to grow our voices and, you know, network with new artists. We went beyond that and decided to become a legit nonprofit so that we could start seeking those grant opportunities and funding sources so that we can pay all the artists that we collaborate with. And that is kind of where we are right now. I mean, we became a
Hmm.
nonprofit in 2018, but then we had to
Yeah.
build our credibility, put out these
Hmm.
projects regularly, and then finally start applying for grants to create opportunities for artists in print. And that's what we've been doing. We created the BIPOC and Queer Publishing Fund. I want to say it was 2020.
Yeah, that's when we started gathering funds for it. But are you talking about the Cal Arts
Yeah.
one?
So, okay.
That one, that was a long journey. It started in 2020, and I think it went all the way till 2022 when we finally got accepted and eventually awarded practically at
Yes.
the end of
So we
that year.
created the publishing fund, BIPOC and
Yeah,
Queer Publishing Fund, and this was just a general fund for anyone in the public
yeah.
to donate funds to. But of course, we were looking for those bigger funding sources, applying for grants, which are very competitive in Southern California because you have LA County. If you're doing
Yeah.
California grants, you have all of California you're competing with. And we finally were awarded a large grant, which we were able to create 10 projects that were fully paid for artists to apply to
Hmm.
create their books and produce their print projects with us. So not only did we start as this truly a community of artists that love print and love lo-fi and love networking, but now we're also able to offer these funds for artists to apply for and make their basically their print projects come to full fruition and beyond what they had
Yeah.
imagined to begin with. Um, I want to talk about some of our favorite examples of print projects that were able to fund recently. So, I have a confession by Sherry Mae Jackson. This is a perfectly bound book that we co-designed with the artist. She is a writer and a photographer residing right here and it was at the time in Fontana, California, which is right in the heart of the Inland Empire. Now she's in Pasadena, but at the time her practice was reflecting on the open mic nights that she'd go to, archiving photos of the place where she got her film developed at, interviewing different artists and expressing herself in terms of what it means to be an artist living right here in the Inland Empire. So Sherry reached out to us for with a basic prompt, right? When you're an artist, you have this vision, this high vision typically, and you don't know exactly how you're going to get there, but you can see it. So the way that Curious Publishing has made this an accessible way for artists is that we provide an open call and you give us a simple prompt. So it's like, for instance, Sherry's prompt was, I have a collection of Inland Empire photography. Here's some examples of my poetry, some examples of my film photography, my website or Instagram. And it starts really with us reaching out to that artist. In this case, it was Sherry. And starting that conversation, why is it important for you to have a print project? Um, do you envision how it's going to look in its final form, or do you need help getting there? So we Curious Publishing is that bridge. uh, we meet with the artist, we show them some examples of our print capabilities, depending on what studios we're working with at the time. We print in-house, we outsource, and we make sure that they have an idea of a budget, depending on grant funds or their personal funds. And we create the skeleton for an artist to build up their project from the ground up. We have their concept up high, and then we kind of go in and do that stuff that isn't that fun. so Curious Publishing puts out a lot of really fun projects, but Sam knows there's a ton that goes into
Oh yeah.
planning. Do you have
Hmm.
any memories
Yeah.
of that?
Yeah. No, it's pretty interesting. As I mentioned again, I might go on a little bit here, but I help run our brick and mortar store, which is in downtown Claremont, and first of all, the opportunity that affords us, just having people just seeing independent publishing, let alone our own, is just wonderful. I get to tell them about this whole world, for the most part, that they're missing out of. Or sometimes if people have an idea of what a zine is, or maybe even they've even heard of us, they ask like, well, how does it work? How do I get it published? So what happens, I find, is it's really interesting the kind of artists that we'll have and get to us. Some people have already a design in mind, and it's just a matter of them just wanting us to just distribute it because they love our network, they love what we do. And then some people are really in the dark. And, as far as formatting goes, Rebecca does all of her work on InDesign. In fact, one of my zines that I made, I formatted it on Google Docs, which to me, I was like, okay, it has like this font, it has like this font color, it's like this typeface is italicized here, and she's like, great, I have to start from the ground up when I do it in InDesign. And I'm like, wait, what do you mean? I already did it for you. It's like, no, 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 they're not compatible. So even just that project in particular, which that one was pretty much only text, um, I have had the privilege of seeing how much work it goes into laying stuff out. So when it's gone to things like us doing our first jacket cover or dust jacket, and seeing just how all those things need to get taken into consideration, it's just fascinating to see. Like, oh, um, every single pixel is something that must be accounted for. So yeah, no, it's and then people like when they see the results, they're like they want to work with us because it's what we do and what Rebecca does is just simply fantastic. But yeah, it's pretty interesting. We've had a couple of artists where they gosh, I feel like they didn't even have like the name of their book yet, but they had their art, they knew which book collection they wanted to show. We almost kind of helped them in their formulation, or just like kind of like them honing in on a concept and like, oh, what's the overarching theme of this? And it's pretty interesting to see how kind of guiding and kind of growing with the artist in the creative process, even though ours is mostly just on the logistical side, or just helping them realize stuff to their vision. Even then, do it's like yeah, it's interesting. It's like it's like writing a song, and then when you go to the studio, it's like, oh wait, like all of a sudden, now that you're seeing it from this certain way, now there's all these new tools and now these new formats that weren't previously conceived. That it's like the scope opens, widens, and it's yeah, it's pretty great to see the final product.
Yeah, it really truly takes a village of people in different roles. I mean, you have the artist who is making this beautiful vision of their work, but you need like your copy editors, people that know how to use software like the Adobe Suite or what have you, depending on what the project is. And that's something I'm really proud that we've been able to start sharing with artists as part of our budgeting is, you know, buying subscriptions for new artists to the Adobe Cloud and giving demonstrations, like, oh, you want to lay out a zine, but you're not really sure how to. You can go the old school way, use a photocopier, collage something and, mass produce it at FedEx and Kinko's. And I think that that's a wonderful way to do it. But just with growing popularity in zines and art book fests, and people are starting to, well, at least I'm seeing the trend that a lot of artists want to elevate their work to another level and they want to have a little more control over the final look of their printed project. And that's where these tools come in handy. And I've taken it upon myself to kind of become that expert person in leading people through the process. So we're really taking something, from the classic art world, which is 2D design. We're taking a little bit from journalism and, creative writing. Uh, we're taking their vision and story and then meshing all that together in a book layout, which may not sound that exciting, but once that those pages are printing off, you know, the press and you get to assemble the book pages together and see what that final result is, um, the book itself becomes its own living object beyond what the original artist's practice is, in my opinion. So that's been the real beauty of connecting with artists and putting these projects together. What I hope that people can take away from this is that they see the value and ease at which it is to create a printed project and incorporate that into their art practice, but also see the lasting impact it can have on your community by taking it upon yourself to archive your own practice and how that's an important part of you know, the cultural context of your own community, and how you can use zines and printmaking as a tool to share that footprint or that snapshot of your community at this time right now. And you know, zines are the most raw form of news, of queer identity, of a woman's identity, of a black artist's identity right now, when that artist is physically writing down their own thoughts or taking photos or writing their prose and compiling that through their own vision. That's the most honest and raw version of life through their eyes, you know, in an anthropological sense, even, that you're going to have. And I think that it's so important that libraries are taking it upon themselves to create zine libraries to really take a snapshot of time of what's happening right now. And I think it'll always be really important that we have some version of a zine going forward, so that we artists and community members can take it upon ourselves to tell our own stories that are unfiltered and unbiased or uninfiltrated by outsider opinion, spin, what have you. And we really want to be that hub in our region and beyond now, or, you know, on the West Coast, for people to collaborate with us and, you know, even just bounce a raw idea off of us to see if there's something that we can do to either provide a resource, a collaborator, or see a full printed project to its full fruition through Curious. So yeah, that's our mission, and we're sticking to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
If people wanted to collaborate with Curious Publishing, you go to curiouspublishing.org. We have a submissions tab year round. There are open calls for our quarterly Curious magazine. We have a biannual issue called Abeam, which is all about culture. And we have open calls for independent proposals as well, which provide funding to individual artists who want to see their work either in a book or in a printed project.
And that's the beauty of our rotating themes that we do, especially for Curious Magazine, because the truth is, since we're a nonprofit and we work full-time jobs, it's like at some point it's like we can only take on so many individual artist books per year, which is why working with grants is just simply beautiful, that it just frees up so much of the headache of just sourcing the funding in order to make these projects happen. But when people are like, how do we get involved? Please, like, seriously, submit to our quarterly magazine. It's so easy. Follow the prompt, and I love explaining to people the range that we've offered in the past. We started with Millennial Pink, and the next issue we 180 to Revenge. In 2020, we did a bunch of stuff that was more identity focused, starting with our Latinx issue, then going to the women's issue, and rounding it off with a BIPOC issue. And then we've also done ones that were a little bit more medium focused, like we did one called Archive, which was all on film photography. Then we also did another, one of my personal favorites, lowbrow slash pop surrealism. So a lot of pop art. And yeah, and then of course we've done ones that are pretty abstract, like the Revenge one, or Psychedelia was another popular one too. And right now we're rounding out a year of Empathy, and we have Empathy and Community coming out as far as the last in that series. So really, we try to just have these prompts that almost anyone can connect to in some way. And if you as an artist are like feeling the urge to submit, but you're kind of scratching your head or not exactly sure how to respond to the prompt, just kind of like our name, not to be a little cheesy, but just dig a little deeper and explore that. The first time I published music for that very first issue, I think I worked on something for 3 weeks and it was going nowhere, and then one day it just all came to me. So it's yeah, you got to do the work, but it's so rewarding. And then to see it in print, you'll get goosebumps, especially if there's no first feeling like that too. So it's important, and especially as coming from where we are, it's just being able to speak your truth and own it is a huge thing. Because as I've explained to people when we've tabled in Seattle, or when we tabled the other week in San Francisco, where we are in Southern California, as Rebecca explained, it's very working class, a lot of industry, a lot of suburban sprawl, a lot of Amazon warehouses. There is funding for the arts, but there's honestly a lot of nepotism And at the same time, there's just a lot of the same old faces you'll just kind of see. And in nowhere except for independent publishing or smaller communities or things like that we do through Curious Publishing, where you can see things that are, you know, unapologetically queer, or things that really focus on mental illness, things that are blatantly critical of capitalism, or anything where, it's a little bit too much on the counterculture. So I feel that we highlight something that people either just feel isn't a voice being highlighted at all, or one that they haven't quite gotten the grasp of it themselves yet. So in the coming on 5 years that we've been doing this, one of my favorite things is just seeing how many people we've inspired to create and just be brave and be themselves.
It's the art of publishing, you know. You start with a concept and then you continue to add pages and volumes, and I think that's just the beauty of zine making and printmaking, is that you can always pick up another page and share another story. So I think that this is one of the strongest ways to continue storytelling in the art world, is through printed matter. And we hope that that's something that has resonated with you all. So thank you.
Thank you.